Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents The Skeleton Under the Stairs by K.M. Avery. Narrated by Daniel Henning. Chapter 1. You would think that seeing dead people would be exciting. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's amazing and wonderful. Sometimes it's heartbreaking. Sometimes it's downright terrifying. Usually, though, it's just annoying. Dead people aren't all that different from living people, aside from being mostly insubstantial. You get the nice ones, the smart ones, the dumb ones, and the assholes, exactly the same way you do with the living. As far as I'm concerned, the only notable benefit to the dead people is that if they really piss me off, I can make them go away. Sadly, this is not something I can do with the still breathing without breaking several fairly significant laws and my own moral code. My name is Ward Campion. I'm a medium, courtesy of a fairly lengthy bout with the magical ability-granting Arcana virus about 7 years ago. I'm also the co-owner of Beyond the Veil Investigations. My other half, in every sense of the phrase, is Mason Manning, ex-professor, historian, witch, and orc. Last spring, we partnered our tiny little company with the Lost Lineage Foundation, which specializes in helping people find their deceased family, maybe parents, maybe grandparents, maybe ancestors several times removed. Poor Mason has been up to his eyeballs in archives ever since. He loves it, the great big nerd. At the moment, he was off nosing around in some county courthouse going through records dating back a couple centuries, which is why I was having to deal with the irritation that was a living, breathing human being. The woman in front of me was wearing enough perfume that she was probably violating an EPA regulation, and I was trying my best not to cough or let my eyes water, even through a mask. Admittedly, I am more sensitive than most people to things like scents, but I've been around plenty of people with the capacity to keep their personal eau de toilette at less than chemical warfare levels. She had a shortish asymmetrical bob that had been liberally streaked by blonde highlights, although the base color underneath was a medium brown. Her eyes were also fully made up with what looked, to my admittedly inexperienced eye, like false lashes, in addition to at least 2 shades of pink shadow. Her mask, sliding precariously close to the end of her nose, was covered in tiny glittery pink flowers. She had yet to tell me who the fuck she was or what she wanted. "I want to speak with the owner," she repeated for what must have been the 3rd time, slowly enunciating each syllable. I sighed, also for the 3rd time, and repeated myself. "I am the owner. The real owner." I was so done with this. "Ma'am, I started this business, personally, 6 years ago." She blinked at me, and I tried to decide whether or not her pupils were actually that color, or whether the intense green was the result of colored contacts. "You're Edward Campion?" "I am." I tried not to sound as annoyed as I actually was. "My headshot is on the website. It looks exactly like me. I have no idea what she was expecting, if not me. I mean, okay, masks sometimes make it harder to recognize someone, but if the owner is a pale, skinny guy with messy black curls, just how many people who look like that do you think work for his company?" I guess the problem was that headshots don't include the wheelchair. And once she saw the chair, then she made all sorts of judgments about the person in it. It wasn't, annoyingly, uncommon. Her look of incredulity was evident. "I don't believe you." "Well, I'm afraid I don't keep a birth certificate at the office," I snapped back. "If you aren't going to talk to me, then you might as well leave, because no one with any more authority is ever going to show up." She stared at me, her eyes wide. I would have bet significant money that under her mask, her mouth was hanging open. I deliberately turned myself around to head back into my office. "No, wait!" I didn't bother suppressing the smirk that slid over my face. I had a mask on, after all. Mine was an understated black with dark gray swirls. I turned myself around again. Is there something I can help you with, after all? The woman drew herself up to her full but unimpressive height and looked down her nose at me. It's not hard. In my chair, I come up to the middle of most people's chests. It's still annoying as fuck. I need you to conduct a seance. I was going to really hate this woman. We can discuss your situation to see if conducting a seance is going to be helpful. She narrowed those green eyes at me. I know I need a seance. I suppressed a sigh. That may well be the case, but sometimes there are other more appropriate alternatives, like a banisher or exorcist, if the spirit in question was being violent or destructive. She huffed at me, the sides of her mask puffed out at the exhalation of air. There is a spirit in my house, she proclaimed. I nodded. Did you wish to communicate with them, or are they making noises or breaking things? I don't think they've broken anything, but there are definitely noises. Okay. I didn't point out that houses make settling noises all the time. Are they posing a problem? I don't know. I felt my eyebrows go up. You don't know if they're a problem? Well, I don't know anything about them, now do I? They're noises. I frowned. What kind of noises? Just noises. I counted quickly to 5 in my head to avoid saying something obscenely rude. What is it that makes you think there's a spirit in your home causing the sounds? I know. How do you know? I pressed. She sniffed. Because I do. Oh, for fuck's sake. So, the spirit does not move objects, write on mirrors, interfere with electronics, or do anything else to indicate their presence? You don't hear words, for instance, or crying? No. She sounded a little hesitant, but she didn't elaborate. Are the noises loud? No, just sounds. I let the silence stretch for a few minutes before replying. And what exactly makes this spirit a problem, then? You know. I clenched my jaw. I'm afraid I don't. Well, what if they're unsavory? You're concerned about a criminal spirit? It could corrupt my children. Are your children mediums? She huffed again. Of course not. Then how exactly would they be corrupted by a spirit? Undue influence, she proclaimed. I was fairly certain she had no idea what that phrase even meant. I tried to steer things back to somewhere less stupid. So you would like to have a seance to determine whether or not the spirit in your home is some sort of bad influence? Finally, yes! The request was idiotic. I was probably still going to do it anyway. I was bad at saying no to people. And money. All right, ma'am. If you'll come into my office, I can pull up our calendar and we can find a time that's available. We settled on the following Tuesday, although the woman, Paula Kirstis, had objected repeatedly that I wasn't going to help her immediately, or at least not this week. I politely informed her that we typically booked our clients multiple weeks out, and she was lucky to get a time that was only a week away. After huffing and sighing a good deal more about how put out she was with me and how much of a burden her life was, I finally managed to escort her out of the building. She seems fun, Mason's resonant voice remarked from behind me. I pulled a face as I unhooked my mask from my ears, turning so that I could see all 6'7" of his green muscle and exposed lower canines. Orcs, like all arcanids, could no longer contract arcanavirus, so he didn't need to wear a mask. I am not looking forward to that one, I told him. You could have said no, he pointed out, always practical. I grimaced. She's paying for it, I answered. I'm sure. You do remember that we can actually afford to be picky now, right? I sighed. Yeah, I know. I'm just used to it, I guess. Putting up with bullshit? I barked a laugh. Yeah, apparently. He stepped out in the hallway to meet me as I rolled toward him. Mason stopped when I reached him, then bent down and pressed a kiss to my lips. His were warm and tasted like chocolate. You have candy? He laughed. Yours is on my desk. I didn't want to, interrupt. In other words, he didn't want to make himself visible to a client who would probably take umbrage at the fact that he was an orc. Sadly, he was probably right, given how much of an issue she had with me. But chocolate was chocolate, and I reached out and wiggled my fingers, palms up. Still laughing, Mason went into his office, returning with a bar of toffee chocolate. Ooh, you got the good stuff. I had to bribe Fiona, he replied. For what? Fiona, the librarian in charge of special arcane collections at the Library of Virginia, was a friend and a huge fan of Mason's. She'd probably have done whatever it was without a bribe, although I wasn't judging. I always brought her coffee when I went in. Apparently, Mason had taken to bringing her fancy chocolate. I wasn't jealous. Fiona isn't into either men or orcs, and Mason doesn't like women. And he always brought me chocolate, too. Access to something I probably shouldn't have access to, came the response. I opened the wrapper of my chocolate and broke off a piece, sticking it in my mouth. What's that? The Diary of Hannah Neal, which isn't in Richmond. I need help getting into the special collections in the Northumberland County Historical Society. Rumors about Hannah's abilities suggest that she could not only make contact with the dead, but also command them. I swallowed my chocolate. You're trying to figure out if I have some sort of blood magic. The term was used for someone born with magical abilities not tied to arcanavirus. As far as I knew, I hadn't been born with any such abilities, but what I was capable of doing as a medium went beyond what was typical. Most mediums could summon and talk to the dead. Some, usually known as banishers or exorcists, could push them forcibly across the veil. I could do both, which wasn't unheard of. Possibly a third to half of all mediums could, to one degree or another. What I could do was physically make contact with the dead, giving them quasi-tangible, if slightly goopy, form. Nobody Mason or I had talked to had ever heard of a medium being able to do that. And to top it all off, I could also temporarily give them the ability to touch other people, although I'd only done that once, and I'd been in a state of complete panic at the time. Mason was trying to figure out if there was historical precedent for what I could do, since he was working on the theory that I had some sort of latent magical ability that had been triggered either by the arcanavirus or by our run-in with the long-dead magus who was the reason I was in the wheelchair. The past couple of years had been rather eventful. I'd met Mason a few months before that, a year and 10 months ago to be specific. The day I'd met him changed my life completely, although it had taken me a few weeks before I'd started to realize just how much. A couple months later, I'd ended up in a fight with the dead magus, Preston Fitzwilliam, who literally clawed out part of my sacral spine and put me in this chair. And not long after that, we'd shut down an institution ironically named Tranquil Brook, designed to drain magic from its unwitting patients under the guise of providing them with long-term mental health care. Most of them were doing much better these days. While investigating that, we'd also learned about the existence of a shadowy magical organization known as the Antiquus Ordo Arcanum, and then promptly hit a dead fucking end. One of the doctors at Tranquil Brook had been a member of the Ordo, but aside from the names of its leaders, he hadn't provided much more information. He was low-ranking and was only occasionally permitted to attend rituals, at which most members were masked and hooded. And the Ordo had murdered him and 2 nurses because they were a risk to the operation at Tranquil Brook. I've yet to hear about a secret society that doesn't do some nefarious shit, but this one was a party to at least 3 and probably more murders, the torture of quite a few children and adults, and who knew what else. I was firmly of the opinion that people who were part of secret societies probably should think very carefully about why, exactly, it was that the people around them hid their faces. Because if the organization is legit, they would have no reason to keep themselves, or it, secret. Mason was working on it, as was Detective Hart, who had been the lead investigator on the murder cases. Neither of them had come up with much of anything, though. At least not yet. And if all that weren't exciting enough, we'd also officially launched Beyond the Veil's office with an open house for both us and Lost Lineage last August. Mason and I had been shocked at how busy we'd been since. The founder of Lost Lineage, Elspeth Lefavre, had been very, very good at drumming up business, particularly from wealthy clients. After only a few weeks, she'd brought in a handful of people who clearly needed to find more ways to spend their money. And it wasn't long before we'd started getting occasional pro bono cases funded by Lost Lineage, most of them through the Alegba Society's connections throughout the American South. We were now 3 months from our 1-year business anniversary, and I still had to pinch myself sometimes to make sure the whole thing wasn't a dream or hallucination. Oh, and Mason and I were 7 months from our wedding, and really, really behind on planning. In theory, I understood that things like flowers and cakes and food and clothing were required, but fuck all if I could find either the willpower or the time to actually sit down and plan any of it. I was half hoping that Mason was doing it, but I also knew that he was just as busy as I was, if not more so. We really needed to get on that. Chapter 2. "The fucknut shitbag took a deal," said the elegant tones of the extremely foul-mouthed elf on the other end of the phone. "Well, hello, Detective Hart, how are you?" I replied, forcing myself to sound chipper. "I take it you have news?" Even though I was teasing him, my blood pressure had immediately skyrocketed at what he'd said, because I could only think of one person that Hart would call that and expect me to know who it was. From across the kitchen, Mason's eyebrows went up, and he turned to partially face me as he stirred a bechamel sauce on the stove. I heard Hart sigh. "Ward," he replied by way of a half-assed greeting. "Yeah, Lessing took a plea deal." "Which means what exactly?" I asked. I knew I must have sounded stressed because Mason shut off the burner and came over to put his hands on my shoulders. I didn't bother hitting the speaker button on my phone because Mason's orc hearing was sensitive enough that he could understand Hart either way. "It means he's admitting guilt, probably in exchange for a reduced sentence and being put somewhere that isn't going to get him immediately shanked in the shower. More's the fucking pity." "Okay, so that means there's no trial?" This was the biggest source of my anxiety these days. The idea that I would have to get on a witness stand and testify in front of a whole fucking court that probably included my Auntie Pearl about exactly what Tyler fucking Lessing had done to me when he'd broken into the house and attacked me. And then on top of that, I'd have to somehow explain how I'd managed to enable a dozen ghosts to throw him across the room and cause what they were calling a mini seizure. Both of those things had been literally keeping me, and therefore Mason, up at night since they'd scheduled the trial the better part of 2 months ago. "No trial," Hart confirmed, and I let out a long, relieved breath. Thank fucking God. Mason's fingers squeezed my shoulders. "You still bring Doc with you to every scene I'm not at, you hear me?" I sighed again. Hart had insisted, as everything unfolded, that I always bring Mason with me when I was called in by the police to consult, just in case some of Tyler's buddies decided to try for payback. The idea had made me jumpy as shit at the next 5 crime scenes, but So far, I'd gotten nothing worse than some funny looks, and I might very well have gotten those anyway, since I'm the weird guy who talks to dead people. I will, Hart, but— No buts, Ward, he interrupted. I know these assholes. About half of them are decent, and the rest are varying degrees of shitbags and worse. Okay, I'll bring Mason with me. I promise. I want to hear him say it, Hart insisted. Mason took my phone away. I'll be there, Hart. I didn't hear what Hart said in response, because I do not have orc hearing. Take care, Hart, Mason said, then hung up and handed my phone back. One big hand ran over my curls. You okay? I leaned my head back into his body. Yeah, I just get jumpy every time it comes up. But not having to go to trial is fan-fucking-tastic. Mason let out a short hum. What? I asked him, turning to look up at the uneasy set of his jaw. I'm glad you don't have to go through that, he replied. But I can't help but wish worse on that asshole than I imagine he got. I sighed. I mean, yeah, but I really just want it over with. I know, came Mason's response, his fingers combing gently through my hair. After everything, Hart and Mason had both insisted I get a restraining order against Tyler, even though he'd been arrested and charged. They wanted him legally barred from getting anywhere near me. I was pretty sure that Tyler wouldn't let a restraining order stop him, but I wasn't about to say so out loud, and I figured Mason and Hart both probably knew that. At the very least, if he did violate it, it would be worse for him than if I hadn't gotten one. Assuming I'd lived through the next time. Which, if Tyler had half a brain, I probably wouldn't. What a lovely thought. I reached up and pulled one of Mason's hands down so that I could kiss his fingers. Maybe he'll get shanked in the shower, I said, not really meaning it. Mason huffed, but didn't respond. He ran his hand over my hair one more time, then went back to the stove and his abandoned bechamel. Jamie is coming over to talk about the new bedroom tomorrow, he said, changing the subject. Jamie Reyes was Mason's cousin and a construction contractor. We were renovating several parts of the house, and Jamie was able to offer us a family discount. We were adding on to the house, expanding the master bedroom to make room for Mason's weights, expanding the master bath, adding on a new office space, and putting in a full bath and bedroom upstairs. Jamie and his team had already redone the kitchen to make it more accessible. There were now multiple counters and a sink I could use without having to twist my whole body, and we'd added more hooks and cabinets within my reach. Mason had gotten us an accessibility grant that would cover both the kitchen and bathroom renovations, but the rest he'd taken out a home loan to cover. Which just added to the stress I was feeling about debt. Although I'd finally managed to pay back the money I owed from having contracted Arcana years ago, I'd recently racked up more medical bills in pretty rapid succession. First Preston Fitzwilliam, and then Tyler fucking Lessing. And we were borrowing against future contracts with Lost Lineage for a bunch of stuff in the new office, although at least those were rapidly getting repaid. We were doing well enough at Beyond the Veil that the debt was shrinking. It was just still going to take a little while. I went back to slicing mushrooms, which is what I'd been doing when Hart called. Cutting things is not really the best occupation when your brain is distracted by thinking about the fact that, unless he died, I was afraid that I wasn't ever going to be able to fully purge Tyler Lessing out of my life. Shit! I stuck my now bleeding finger in my mouth. You okay? Mason asked, looking over at me. I took out my finger, which I'd nicked just enough to draw blood. Yeah, I answered. It's fine. We kept a kitchen first aid basket so I wouldn't have to roll myself all the way to the bathroom if I was the victim of accidental self-inflicted chopping wounds. Mason brought over the basket and I stuck a Band-Aid on my finger, holding it up. See, all good. He kissed it in response, then went back to the stove. You don't mind a little blood in the mushrooms, do you? Extra protein. Some vegetarian you are. I'll make an exception for you. I laughed. Will you? The look he shot me was amused and a little flirty.
You know I will.
I rolled myself and the mushrooms over to him and was rewarded with a lingering kiss that I eagerly returned, one hand making sure the cutting board didn't fall off my lap. Then Mason pulled back and took the mushrooms from me.
Thank you.
Seriously? I get a kiss like that and you just take the mushrooms? His gold-flecked eyes sparkled as he set the cutting board on the counter, then bent down, and one big hand, cradling the back of my skull, kissed me again, deeply.
Better?
He asked when he drew back again. Mm-hmm. I let go of where I'd clenched a hand in his t-shirt, and he kissed my forehead.
Good. Because now I need to finish dinner.
Over plates of roasted mushroom and tomato Alfredo, which was, as Mason's cooking always was, fucking amazing, Mason started telling me about the diary of Hannah Neal.
She was accused of witchcraft, specifically what looks like necromancy, although the term in the records I was able to find was negromancy, which could be interpreted either as necromancy or possible as what it literally translates to, which would be black magic.
I watched him, smiling as I chewed, enjoying the gleam in his sunburst eyes, the animation in his face as he waved one hand, currently holding a partially eaten piece of garlic bread. I nodded my head, indicating I was listening.
But whether it was necromancy or black magic, one of her daughters, also named Hannah, kept a diary of her own, talking about how her mother taught her to speak with her sisters.
Her mother had to teach her how to talk to her sisters? Was she deaf or something? Mason smiled, taking a bite of his bread. He explained around the mouthful.
No, both of them died as children.
Oh. Now I got it.
Exactly,
Mason confirmed.
Which means that our Hannah's both mother and daughter were capable of communicating with the dead, and I would guess that we're talking about more than just Alice and Elizabeth.
The sisters? Mason nodded, popping the rest of the bread into his mouth.
Mm-hmm.
He swallowed.
Now, what's even more interesting is that the younger Hannah mentions that her sisters will move things around the house, leaving her shiny stones or flowers or other trinkets on shelves or windowsills.
I chewed my pasta thoughtfully. There are strong enough spirits to move objects.
Move, yes. Pick up and deliberately place? That's pretty rare.
But not unheard of.
True enough, and yet Hannah talks about needing to perform particular rituals that her mother taught her in order to help her sisters to stay hale.
I thought about that. You mean that her mother and she were doing some sort of magic to give her dead sisters the ability to move objects?
That's what it sounds like to me.
It sounded that way to me, too. And you don't know of any such rituals or spells?
No,
Mason replied. He twirled pasta around his fork, then put it in his mouth.
And I asked Gran, and she hadn't heard of any such spell either.
Mason's grandmother, Mariana, was a bruja from the Dominican Republic. She had trained him from the time he was 8. I tapped my fork against the edge of my plate before loading it up again. So you think that she might have had whatever I have? Mason nodded.
I think she did. And as much as I know you don't want to hear it, I think it's the same thing Preston Fitzwilliam had, too.
I made a face. He was right that I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to share anything with Preston Fitzwilliam.
If this is a born ability, then at least you know that it's less likely that it's something you borrowed from him,
Mason pointed out. One of our possible theories about my ability to make physical contact with spirits, something that most mediums definitely could not do, was that it was something I'd stolen, or that had been left behind when Preston Fitzwilliam attempted to take control of me, or when I destroyed him. Mason had also suggested that it was possible that I had already had a latent ability that had just been dormant.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?